A crate door swings open. Nothing moves for 4 seconds. Then a shoulder, massive and dark, fills the gap. The animal steps into Romania. 7 of them came through that morning. October 2014. Each animal between 600 and 900 kilograms of muscle and bone. The forest had not held a single one for over 200 years. Not one. My name is Raymond Finch. I arrived at the Tarku monitoring station 3 weeks after that release. I have watched ecosystems collapse on 4 continents. I have learned to read a landscape the way you read a face. And this valley looked hollow. Ionut Popa was already there. WWF Romania field monitor, stationed at the release site from day 1. Within 48 hours, he documented something his models had not prepared him for. The animals did not scatter. They moved together, deliberately, straight toward the densest section of canopy. All 7 of them, coordinated, like a machine finding its groove. They stripped bark. They bulldozed understory brush. The rate of disturbance Popa recorded in those first 48 hours exceeded every prediction built for a herd this small. No model had anticipated it. This forest had been silent for 2 centuries, not recovering, not resting. Locked, degraded into a dense, overgrown monoculture that had genuinely forgotten what direct sunlight felt like. The question I carried into that valley was not whether 7 animals could survive. Any ecologist worth the title stops worrying about survival at 600 kilograms per animal. The real question was harder. Could 7 animals restart a biological system that 200 years of absence had locked into a new, diminished state? By day 3, Popa opened his field notebook and wrote something I have since read a dozen times. The bison had already torn open a gap in the canopy, roughly 40 meters across. He wrote that this gap should not have been visible from the ridge for at least a season. That gap Popa recorded from the ridge, 40 meters of torn sky where there had been none, was not the surprise. The surprise was what surrounded it, a forest so unbroken, so uniformly green, that every photograph taken from above looked like a healthy wilderness. It was not. Rewilding Europe baseline surveys, conducted between 2012 and 2014, found ground-level light in the core zones registering below 3% of full daylight. That is the interior of a sealed warehouse wearing the costume of wilderness. A forest can be impoverished and still look primeval. The 2 facts are not contradictory. They are exactly what makes the Carpathian case so instructive, and so easy to get wrong. The geographic record lays the collapse out precisely, location by location. In the Tartu Mountains, the last European bison had gone by the 1790s. Within 2 generations, the valley floor that historical surveys described as a mosaic of glades and dense stands had closed into uniform shadow. Across the broader southern Carpathians, fewer than 12 native wildflower species were recorded per hectare in the densest closed canopy zones by 2013, ground that, under natural disturbance, should hold closer to 40. In Romania's Vânătorii Neamt Natural Park to the northeast, a managed group of 60 individuals showed canopy gap frequency 3 times higher than the unmanaged Tarku site, a difference produced entirely by physical presence, nothing else. Along the Cerna River Valley, amphibian survey teams in 2011 recorded fewer than 4 breeding species in a riparian corridor that records from the 1700s called extraordinarily rich in frogs and salamanders, fewer than 12 wildflower species per hectare, where 40 should have stood. That is not a forest in recovery. That is a floor that has forgotten how to receive light. Popa had reviewed all of this pre-release data in Carpathians in 2013, a year before the herd arrived. In his published survey report, he wrote that what the team had assumed was a recovering ancient ecosystem was, in measurable terms, an overgrown biological monoculture, one that had forgotten, in his exact phrase, what sunlight and large-body disturbance feel like. He was not being poetic. A single canopy layer thick enough to block 97% of incoming light does not permit the seedling establishment that drives long-term structural diversity. The floor goes silent, then it stays silent, because nothing is breaking it open. Vânătorii Neamt, 350 kilometers to the northeast, had 60 individuals and showed canopy gaps 3 times more frequent than Tarku. Tarku had 0 individuals and 0 gaps. The arithmetic is plain, but here is what the data from Vanatori could not explain. Those 60 individuals had been present for over a decade, and the gap rate had plateaued. It had not continued climbing as population density held steady. Something besides raw numbers was governing the rate of disturbance. The mechanism had not been identified by the time Popa's team arrived at Tarku in October 2014, 7 individuals stepping into 200 years of locked silence, and by day 3, the ridge already showed a wound in the green. What the Vanatori data had not prepared anyone for was the speed, not the fact of disturbance, the speed. The speed is what breaks you open. But before the Bison set foot on that ridge, Romania had already spent 3 decades trying to do what they did in 72 hours. Selective logging crews moved through the southern Carpathians with a specific mandate: cut in patterns that mimic natural gaps, coax sunlight down, wake the dormant seed bank below. It was careful, methodical, expensive work. Between the 1990s and 2012, Wolf and Link's reintroduction programs drew several million euros in monitoring costs, compensation payments, and conflict management fencing. Nearly 2 decades of sustained institutional spending across the same terrain the Bison would inherit. Hand crews planted wildflower seed mixes across 560 managed hectares, season after season. Restoration ecology textbooks would have called it sound practice. The Carpathian soil mostly disagreed. After 20 years of that work, ground layer plant diversity in the managed zones had climbed by fewer than 6 new plant types per hectare. A gain so narrow, it dissolved inside the measurement error of the baseline surveys themselves. Romania's National Forest Administration made its position formal in 2013. A written objection citing bark stripping as a threat to standing timber and citing the cost of tracking large ungulates across roadless terrain. Both concerns were real. Neither was wrong. This is the part that made me stop and reread the field notes. Their objection named bark stripping as the risk, the precise physical behavior that Ionit Popa's 2014 surveys would confirm, was doing what the chainsaws, the seed bags, and the predator programs had not. What 20 years of managed intervention could not produce across 560 handled hectares. 7 animals began generating in their first season. No budget, no prescription, no crew. Popa noted in his post-release report that the 7 animals were not selecting trees randomly. They returned to the same stems repeatedly. Pressure applied with the precision of an organism that evolved inside this exact ecosystem across 6,000 years of co-adaptation. The agencies had spent millions trying to replicate something the Bison had never stopped knowing how to do. They said it could not come back. It came back. Start with the body itself. A 700-kilogram animal leaning full weight into a beech trunk does not browse. It engineers. Bark comes off in sheets, lower branches snap. And where the canopy held solid for decades, a gap opens. Light hits the forest floor for the first time in decades. Not filtered light, direct light. The kind that seeds have been waiting underground to feel. Within that first growing season after the 2014 release, monitoring teams documented grass and low forb species appearing in at least 8 distinct clearings the animals had opened. The hooves do a second job. Every step through soft Carpathian soil churns the surface, breaking the compacted crust that had sealed germination out for a generation. The herd moves, and the ground behind it is a different ground entirely. By winter of that first year, Ionut Popa's team recorded the earliest bison wallows in the Tarku zone, shallow depressions running 2 to 4 meters across, pressed into the hillside soil. Snowmelt filled them, spring turned them into standing pools. Within 72 hours of the first dung deposits, invertebrate field surveys confirmed dung beetle activity across multiple genera. Ecologists had projected that result would take a minimum of 2 full growing cycles to establish. It took 3 days. By 2015, flowering plant species richness inside the disturbed zones had measurably risen against undisturbed controls. The canopy gaps were not wounds in the forest. They were the mosaic the historical Carpathian woodland had depended on, and had not seen since the 1790s. Then the wallow pools did something nobody had written into any model. By 2017, amphibian survey teams returned to those exact sites and recorded 3 breeding amphibian species with no prior documentation in the Tarku monitoring record. 3 species, in pools that had not existed 36 months before. Popa, reviewing the full 3-year dataset in Karin Sabes, found that his original model had projected vertebrate recolonization would require a minimum of 7 years to reach that threshold. The animals reached it in 3, no timetable, no instruction, no awareness of being watched. And yet, the ecological sequence those animals triggered had been described, in outline, by historical ecologists who studied Carpathian forests before industrial logging began. The blueprint was never lost. It was just waiting for the animal that carried it. A single large body moving through a forest is not a disruption. It is a delivery system for light, for standing water, for the nutrient cascade that every dependent species has been positioned to receive. What those 7 animals built in 36 months, the forest had been signaling it needed for 2 centuries. And the question now is whether the valley can hold what is already beginning to arrive. By spring 2016, the boundary the management team had drawn around 200 hectares of Tarku terrain meant nothing to the herd. The wire was there. The plan was there. The bison were somewhere else. Farmers in villages adjacent to the release zone woke up to damage they had not been told to expect. Fence posts knocked sideways, bark stripped from timber stands they owned, and no clear line in the compensation agreement that covered any of it. At least 2 bark stripping incidents in privately held timber stands triggered compensation claims the rewilding budget had not absorbed. That number sounds small. Each one required a negotiation the team had not planned for, and goodwill they could not afford to lose. The original feasibility study had modeled the herd staying within that core zone for a minimum of 2 years. The animals crossed its edge well before that deadline, ranging into terrain the team classified as marginal and had left unequipped. Ionit Popa's 2017 field report records the herd using ground above 1,400 meters. Elevation, the feasibility study had explicitly written off. No monitoring equipment had been placed there. Whatever the cascade produced on those slopes, no instrument recorded it. Popa, stationed at the site since day 1 in 2014, had documented anomalies before. The 40-meter canopy gap on day 3, the disturbance rate that outpaced every small herd model. But ranging into unmonitored high terrain was a different category of surprise. The data simply stopped at the altitude where the bison kept going. Then, the reproduction numbers arrived. Within 3 years of the 2014 release, calves had been born in the Tarku Valley. The team had hoped for this. They had not modeled it as likely before year 4, a herd that was not supposed to reproduce in the wild until year 4 had done it by year 3. The calves did not consult the projection. They arrived on the valley's schedule, not the models. The rewilding team had committed to restoration. By spring 2016, they were also managing farmer grievances, unbudgeted payments, and a herd that had outrun their equipment. That gap between the commitment on paper and the cost in the field is the part no press release covered. What Popa's 2017 report makes plain is that a genuinely recovered animal does not stay inside the boundary you drew for it. The moment it crosses that line, you find out whether the commitment was real. And up in the unmonitored rock above 1,400 meters, something is still unfolding, counted by no one, recorded by nothing, that the next team to climb those slopes will have to make sense of alone. What stays with me, after 40 years of watching ecosystems collapse and claw back, is not the data. It is the silence before the data arrives. That interval when the land is already moving and no instrument has caught up yet. Ionut Popa spent a decade at the Tarsu Mountains watching 7 animals do what no feasibility model predicted. By 2024, his notebooks documented a valley that had physically reorganized itself around a presence it had not held since the 1790s. That is not metaphor. That is documented morphology. The law underneath all of this is not complicated. Remove the pressure, return the missing part. The system moves back toward what it was. Not because of hope, not because of luck, but because that is what biological systems do when you finally stop preventing them. Collapse is not the final state. It is the system waiting, with a patience that outlasts any human administration, for the pressure to lift. Those 7 animals grazed wallows that became amphibian pools. Their dung fed more than 250 invertebrate species. The gap Popa measured on day 3 of 2014 should not have existed for at least a full season. It was there in 48 hours. That is the thing about a recovered system. It does not wait for your report to be filed. It does not hold still inside the permitted boundary. It goes where the biology goes. And some of those places are inconvenient, expensive, and genuinely beyond anticipation. Before this video ends, I want to ask you to do one thing. Drop your region and one species, just one, that you have personally watched disappear from your landscape in your lifetime. Not a species from a textbook, the one you stopped seeing, and yes or no in the comments. Have you ever seen something come back that you were certain was gone for good? Because if the answer is yes, I want to hear that story. Share this with someone who still believes the damage is permanent, because the evidence says otherwise. Up next, the Iberian lynx in Spain's Doñana National Park, where a population that fell to 94 individuals in 2002 has since crossed 1,000. The Spanish Ministry of Agriculture resisted captive breeding as recently as 2004, citing genetic management concerns. Concerns the animals resolved by breeding faster than the ministry's own timeline projected. The question that video has to answer is the one the data has not yet closed. Whether a predator recovered in fragmented road-cross lowland habitat can maintain the full trophic function it performed before fragmentation. Or whether recovery in numbers and recovery in ecological role are two different things. I'm Dr. Raymond Finch. I'll see you in the field.